Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Hammer Museum, and I want to welcome you all to tonight's talk with members of the AMBOS project. AMBOS is part of the Hammer's 2023 biennial, Made in LA, which is currently on view in our galleries. AMBOS stands for Art Made Between Opposite Sides, and it was founded in 2016 by the artist Tanya Aguiñiga as a platform to engage with the reality of the U.S.-Mexico border through artistic research and collective collaborations between artists, activists, and immigrants. The project aims to raise awareness of how anti-immigrant rhetoric and inhumane policies affect people's lives. So we have 4 members of AMBOS here tonight. I'm going to give you a little background on each of them and then invite them to the stage. Tanya Aguiñiga is an artist, designer, and craftsperson born in San Diego and raised in Tijuana, Mexico. She uses traditional craft materials, collaborates with other artists and activists to create sculptures, installations, and community-based art projects. Her work reflects her binational identity, focusing on the transnational community. She started her career working with the iconic border collective Taller de Arte Fronterizo, or Border Art Workshop, which focused on doing work on and about the U.S.-Mexico border in the 1980s and 1990s. Aguiñiga ran a community center in Tijuana for 6 years, focusing on local injustices, and she continues her activism and community collaboration, working with textiles and Mesoamerican weaving. Aguiñiga holds an MFA in furniture design and has had solo exhibitions at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the Museum of Arts and Designs, among others. Juan Villavicencio lives and works in Tijuana. His work focuses mainly on ceramics, creating sculptures that refer to the imagery of artisan stores, Mexican kitsch, or traditional ornamentation techniques. His work questions the boundaries between art, crafts, and design, as well as the visual identity of the northern border of Mexico. He is a member of the International Academy of Ceramics. Natalie Godinez is an educator and textile artist raised in Tijuana who handled communications, social media, and outreach for AMBOS projects, road trips, and humanitarian efforts. Natalie currently works at Self-Help Graphics with the Self-Help Graphics Youth Committee, Artivist Interns, and other advocacy coalition partners. Her experience as an educator ranges from working with elementary school students in Oakland to working as a teaching artist for various organizations, including the New Children's Museum in San Diego, First Five California in the Bay Area, the Mingay Museum in San Diego, and here at the Hammer Museum. She holds a bachelor's degree in applied design from San Diego State University. Carla Aguiñiga is a transfronteriza Mexican-American artist, educator, and curator from Tijuana. She's curated and managed AMBOS ceramics at the Jardín de las Mariposas in Tijuana since 2020. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Art from UCLA and a Master of Arts in Art Administration and Public Policy from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work as an arts administrator is driven by a desire to create pathways for artists of color of all ages. Our interpreter tonight is Alexia Veitia. She's a Los Angeles-based multilingual professional specializing in language justice, translation, and interpretation. She was formerly part of the language justice collective Antena. Beyond her artistic projects, she actively engages in social and political justice work with organizations such as UCLA, the ACLU, and the Los Angeles Department of Public Health, advocating for language justice and equity in her community and beyond. So now we're going to hear presentations about the history of AMBOS and the various iterative projects they've worked on, including the monumental installation they created for Made in LA that you can see now upstairs on the gallery level. And then they'll take some audience questions, and afterwards we'll have some light refreshments in the theater lobby, and we can all talk about these issues a little more. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Tanya Aguiñiga, Carla Aguiñiga, Natalie Godinez, Juan Villavicencio, and Alexia Veitia.
Hi, everybody. Thank you guys all for coming. We wanted to do a little dance for you, but then, we were like, it's okay. It'll be enough for us just to talk. So I'm Tanya Aguiñiga. It's very nice to meet you all. And Okay. And so, yeah, so just so you guys know who's up here talking with you all. So I'm that one, but my hair grew long now. Natalie's hair also grew long. Carlita is now making a baby. And Juan now has a jacket. Yeah, and glasses. And then Alexia is the interpreter helping us to translate. And so just so you guys have a little bit of a background as to how AMBOS started, I wanted to show you guys a little bit. And Natalia and I both, I think, talk really fast, so you'll have to tell us if we need to slow down. So I, just to kind of let people know like what we're talking about and kind of how I frame stuff, at least for the stuff that I'm talking about. So for me, the border is a metaphor, it's a place, it's also an identity, it's a thing, and it's also a people. And I'm a craft-based artist, and so for me, craft is art, it's design, it's culture, it's object, and it's human. And ambos means both in Spanish, and it stands for art made between opposite sides. And so the majority of us are here, grew up in Tijuana. They grew up in Ensenada, which is very close to Tijuana. I hope that some of you guys have gone to Tijuana before, but we're on the Mexican side on the border with San Diego. So there's a little map for people. And so one of the really big things that I think really shaped a lot of my experiences and our experiences growing up on the border is that people are always coming through. People are always migrating. People are always, coming through our city. And so one thing that I always remember from when I was a little kid is that when I was on the Tijuana side, people would come to our house and knock on the door and say, hey, we're on our way north. Do you have any food? And my mom would make them burritos and food so that they could take with them. And then on the other side of my grandma's house in the US, people would then come over and be like, hey, I just crossed the border. Can I use your bathroom? Do you have a telephone? And it was just the most normal thing to do, is to just be there for each other and to just take care of each other just as humans, regardless of where you come from and what you're on your way to. And so, Carla and I grew up in Playas de Tijuana, which is where the border cuts into the ocean. So for a lot of my childhood, the border looked like this. We didn't really have that much of a fence. We didn't used to have a fence that went into the ocean. We would be able to just go back and forth and use the beach. And then little by little, as policy changed in the US and we started getting more and more borders and more walls and walls that were more intense. And so here's a picture of an older fence, which was actually made out of landing mats from the Gulf War and Vietnam War that the US repurposed to make our border fence. And so now the fence that we have, the current one is 30 feet tall. So here's a picture that shows you to human scale how tall 30 feet is. And so this is a quote from a book called The Neuroscience of Architecture, Mauer-Cronkite Wall Disease. It says, when people look at environments with tall structures, they have a lower sense of control, which gives way to a feeling of smallness and oppression. What follows is a growth of suspicion, the creation of an opposing other, fear, depression, loss, and despair. And so I grew up crossing the border every day to go to school in the US. So I did it from age 4 to 18. And so that kind of going through, those two spaces back and forth every single day really informed a lot of my art practice and who I am as a person. And so this is the US-Mexico border crossing, the port of entry in San Isidro. Juan just crossed there this morning to make it over here. And so just another quote. So I am an act of needing, of uniting and joining that not only has produced both a creature of darkness and a creature of light, but also a creature that questions the definitions of light and dark and gives them new meanings. And it's from Gloria Anzaldúa. So what does that mean? So it means that there's a bunch of us that are transnational that constantly stitch back and forth the two sides of the border, crossing all the time with family on both sides, going to the other side to do laundry, to buy groceries. And so this is an older map of transnational cities and their populations. So in San Diego, Tijuana region, before there used to be 4 million people that would go back and forth all the time. Now that number is much larger. And so growing up, the San Diego region was really a really difficult place to be because there still is, it's a very conservative place that would have a lot of backlash against migrant communities. And so one of the things that really helped me when traversing these two spaces was looking at art and looking at how do we deal with our realities. And so before I knew anything about like art or sculptures or anything like that, I would see this Trojan horse that was up straddling the US-Mexico borderline. And it's Marco Ramirez R's Toyen horse, which was part of Insight, which was a biennial that would happen in Tijuana and San Diego. And so without me knowing, the Border Art Workshop had actually been doing a lot of performances and engaging the dialogue of the US-Mexico border and the issues that we deal with since 1985, and a lot of it was in my backyard, but I didn't know anything about it until I was older. And here's a video of some of the different things that happen art-wise. This is a man being shot in a cannon over the fence, and this was part of Insight. I'm glad we got the video to work. Yeah. This was a door that Richard Liu installed and gave up all the kids around keys to open it, but there was no fence at that time. This was a Border Patrol car that came apart and then all spun. So all of these pieces are projects from Insight that you guys can look up, and maybe Carla will talk a little bit about it as well later. And then just kind of more recent projects that don't have to do with Insight, but I think are really brilliant. So a lot of my introduction to art and to this world came from my mentor, Michael Schnorr, who was my film teacher in community college. And so he just happened to be one of the founding members of the Border Art Workshop. And so he asked me to come and help them. I had expressed that, I was really interested in trying to figure out ways of dealing with a lot of injustices that we were facing at the border and humanitarian crises. And so then I started working with him on a series of art installations that had to do with Operation Gatekeeper, which was the first strategic reinforcement of the US-Mexico border. And so it happened during the Clinton administration, and more people died trying to cross the border in its first year than in the entire 75 years of Border Patrol history, as people were being forced to cross through the desert instead of going through cities. And so for years, Michael and I, and myself as part of the Border Art Workshop at that time, worked on a bunch of different art installations, bringing attention to the fact that tons of people were dying and nobody seemed to care on either the Mexican side or the US side. So we did countless installations, a lot of times collaborating with different faith organizations, like different social justice organizations. And another project that we did that was really formative for a lot of my early education was I worked at Maclovio Rojas, which was and still is a land squat run by women that was made out of trash from the US. And so I have a lot of pretty amazing memories of us doing all of these different projects here in Maclovio Rojas, and the Mexican government decided that the land was worth too much money, and so that people couldn't squat there anymore. And the majority of the people that lived there were indigenous folks from Oaxaca. And so the Mexican government would come in and burn people's houses down, put chains around people's houses and yank them out with semi-trucks. People would get assassinated, people would get put in jail. And so the Border Art Workshop, after so many years of doing these different projects, realized that if you give the media a good image, that you're most likely to get things published or to get coverage for whatever you're talking about. And so we had a relationship with the community where we would provide different opportunities for classes, for art making, and that would bring attention to what was going on in the community. And so it was pretty amazing though. So I was doing this when I was, I think, 19 to 25. And so Carla would come with me. So I think when she first started coming with me, she was 11. And she would come and help me work. And so a lot of what I do, so a lot of that stuff was stuff that now, so I've been working on migrant rights issues and how we use art as a way to deal with us all for 26 years now. And so a lot of what I do now is try to share information with folks as to like history of border art, history of our region, demystifying how people can get involved in stuff, and also trying to just make a bigger platform for more voices to join the conversation about narratives and things that are happening in the borderlands. Let me see. And so then I think I'm gonna... We were sliced in two and longed to be whole. Fluidity rendered mute as a steel scar rusts underfoot. The ocean held no allegiance. It was too permeable a being. Watch me, watch you. You watch, watch me. We are at the precipice of Latin America, El Norte, where 300,000 of our identities and intentions are checked daily. San Isidro International Border Crossing, U.S., Mexico, entering the left armpit of North America and heading towards the brain. The Silk Road of a Chicano collective unconscious, a plaster perimeter, marking our border diaspora. 3-hour wait, softened by burritos and churros. All to connect our two sides to be whole.
So now you've all been brainwashed on believing in AMBOS because you just watched our infomercial. AMBOS, that video that you just saw, was a little snippet from a larger documentation that we did in 2016, which is really when AMBOS started. So as you heard, Tanya has had this long practice of doing community engaged work and working with issues of the border. But in 2016, I think it was even before, so Trump was running. So here's the context of like when these, so I'm going to talk about basically the first interventions that we did as AMBOS and sort of kind of how the whole collective or collaborative started. And it started with Trump was running for office and Tanya had this idea, what if we take a storefront at the U.S.-Mexico border in San Isidro, Tijuana, there's a market. What if we take an empty storefront and turn it into like a cultural space and program out of it? And so the image you see right here is just like, if you've ever crossed this border, these things are familiar. They're like cast like piggy banks of all kinds of pop culture things. And some of these are like have been painted like 30 times to look vibrant, but they have really long lives. And this market is super unique, not only because of its, again, geographic and how it's like, as you kind of saw in the video, you can get food if you're like stuck at the border sometimes for 5-6 hours, which I've definitely had. Like Labor Day weekend, man, I waited 6 hours once. And if you gotta go to the bathroom, gotta pull over and that's where you go to the bathroom. But in this image, I'll sort of show you this market was kind of the first like node and area where we were like thinking about really a lot of the issues of the border, and just like, again, making people like question, like, why are we sitting here for so long? Why are we being treated this way? And again, it's a very unique experience to trans-border culture, but for everyone else, it's kind of bizarre, right? So this is this little area that you see, kind of this little sliver, is where the market is, and it's the only market in all of the U.S.-Mexico border that is actually, it's not owned by the federal, like, it's not owned by the Mexican government or the American government. It's actually, it's owned, it's a co-op, so it's actually owned, the land itself, even though it's within an international border, which should be federal land, is actually owned by, it's like a union of the market. Again, it precedes, it's sort of, anyways, we thought the market was really interesting as a site to, again, problematize. These were some just images of like when we were thinking about the brand identity for AMBOS, which now we've, used for a long time. You kind of sort of inspired by the Mexican Olympics, and our friend David, who's also from the border, from Tijuana, did a lot of this work for us. And, it was a collaborative of a lot of different people coming together. We thought we could make some newspapers. So these were sort of like early ideas. But then what ended up happening is we did find a storefront. But the storefront we found, because it's a union and all the little market is like, there, it's got a lot of politics, we couldn't actually get a storefront that was like, prime real estate, like meaning there's cars and pedestrians. But we were able to secure some billboards, which is kind of what you see right now. You see these billboards, which again, there's hundreds of thousands of people that cross this border and that are just a captive audience. So we thought it'd be great to, again, activate it. The little storefront that we did find was more like in this little courtyard. And here's like our whole family, my mom, my dad, Tanya and I. And then we sort of had little AMBOS headquarters for one summer. And because I'm a product of Claudia Bester's great teachings, I decided, Tanya, had this great idea for what she wanted to work on. But I said, well, if we're going to take over a storefront, we're going to have to program. There's a lot of different audiences and a lot of different people. So what if we, some of the problems with Insight is it was a project, again, Insight was some of the images that we saw of all these really great international artists that came to do interventions. But a lot of these artists were not, they were great artists, but they were not from the border and they weren't actually experiencing what life was like. So for me, it was really important that we invited artists that were living and working in the border and were relating, because, we didn't want to just be the helicopter project that, we had been living in the US for a while and then we just come back to Tijuana, do a thing, and then we leave again. So it was important to activate the space, again, working with artists from Tijuana. So here's just some images of people helping to prep things for Tanya's border quipu, which we'll hear a little bit more about. And here's, we did, again, on the billboards that you saw, we ended up doing screenings on the billboards because, again, it's a captive audience. People are there forever. So we thought, why not use the border and these billboards as like an actual, drive-in, which we curated, or we invited a few different collectives and artists to curate selections of films that were then screened. So there was 3 different weekends. One was the border as site, so again, the geopolitical border, and then border as a visual environment, so thinking about the culture of the border, which, my favorite was when we played Born in East LA, and just like there's the one image or one scene in the movie where all of these migrants just like run across the border and the border wall kind of disappears, and it's just amazing. So that's kind of that little slide that you see. And then border as narrative, so looking at hyperlocal and sort of the regional, and in that part, I'll show you a little bit of what happened, but here's just like some of the programming we did. Again, was pretty amazing. I can't believe we pulled it off. We were like, they're gonna shut us down, but
a lot of people, and hard times had its ups and downs with the mine booms. Now we're slowly dwindling. It is getting smaller. Our schools are getting smaller. We palletize rock, put roofs on houses, whatever's necessary. Some years you get paving crews that come through, but if you're stationed here and here's where you live, it's pretty much, you're here. It's been hit and miss for a lot of years.
So the films were running, but people weren't really watching them that much. But the people who work in the market, they were really enjoying it. So we realized, like, throughout the process that we needed to do more things with them. And you saw that just like a drive-in, you could tune in to the radio station, which was a pirate radio station run by Cognate Collective. And this was another sort of collaboration, but Cognate Collective was really integral to sort of the first ideation of AMBOS and where we were going, and they're still just really great friends. And in this, Cognate Collective did 3 different like conversations while they're like in the border in their car that's called the Border Blaster, and they do conferences inside the car. And they're blasting a pirate radio station that you can only listen to it while you're at the border. And we have, Josh Kuhn was one of the artists, he's a MacArthur Genius Fellow now. And Josh was both DJing and also talking about history of the border. And here's Josh with Amy. And then we also had Rafa Esparza. He was also in the back of the car and giving his conference from the car. And then here's a little video, or maybe it'll play. Anyways, there's a little video of them, but these are still, the recordings are still available. You can still listen to these, and it's so much fun. And again, you can only listen to it while you were at the border, which was really cool. This was a collaboration with Ingrid Hernandez and Peter Weiss, where they created, they did an open call, and there was screen printed. There was basically a collection of pieces submitted by different artists about the border and artists from different borders. And then the result was then we gave it to different people that were waiting in line. So it was sort of this metaphor. And then we also did these animation workshops and collage workshops with some of the children that work, and just there's a lot of indigenous families that are begging for money at the border, and that's their livelihood. They live, they're unhoused, and the kids were like they were, really, really excited to be engaged. And every single day they come and ask oh, how can I help you? What can we do? So then we ended up doing some workshops for the kids, and I try to make it, because I had worked at the Hammer and I kind of saw how the really nice kids workshops look like. I was like, we should make it like that. It should be super inviting. This should be we should make it really cute and have a lot of just good materials. And the kids ended up making some beautiful pieces. And we had a little art show inside the little storefront. And here's a little video of their little stop motion.
¿Ya le tomaste? No. Ya. Dale, puro pesa ahorita. Ya.
They also had their film debut. They watched their own animation, and we had cake. Yeah, that was basically the only time that we actually had people watching the films, was when all the kids came and watched it, which was so much fun. And yeah, it was I think, again, this was a part of the first phase of AMBOS. We took one storefront, and then you'll hear Tanya and Natalie talk a little bit more about how the project went past San Isidro and Tijuana. And we also had a pretty fun closing party where we brought mariachis through the border, and there was a Shrek impersonator that just decided to join the party and became best friends with my dad, and it was a lot of fun. We brought Dub
Shrek
Lab.
gave my dad his crown.
Yeah.
And then they sang Vicente Fernandez together.
They sure did. And we had, Dub Lab. Yeah, DJ Frosty was one of the DJs, and we had like a big cumbia like dance party, and and you can kind of see the border quipu, like it's, after 1 week. No, that's more. That's like 8 days, and that's my parents dancing to the mariachi.
All right, so one of the really big things about this first phase of AMBOS and of us working on the border was that I wanted different types of art to be made and different artists to be participating with us, so that it wasn't just, like everybody's painting, everybody's like doing performance or whatever. So then I wanted, people working in a lot of different mediums. And so one of the things was I also wanted to think about, how do I engage the border with all the things that I've learned, having studied craft? What happens after you come back to a place and you have all these new skills, no? And so one of the things that I kept thinking about was, at the time it was when Trump was running for office the first time, and he kept saying all these bad things about us, about Mexicans. And so I was just like, I really just want to check in on people. I just want to ask them how they are, ask them if they're okay, ask them, you are right. And so then I was like, okay, how am I going to do a project where I talk to people, but people also learn a skill or make something? And we make something collective that helps us understand that we're all connected to each other, but also gives people an opportunity to make, regardless of if they're a child or if they're elderly. And so I had a project that was part of this first phase. So I was also one of the artists. And so what I did was something called the Border Quipu. And so I really like this idea of a quipu, which is an organizational system from the Andes, and people. So there's a picture of the quipu on the side, a quipu. So people think that they're calendars, that they're record keeping, that they're counting systems. People don't really know exactly what they are, and maybe they were everything. And so I liked it as a model for how do we record our daily migrations to the north. And so what I did was I designed these postcards that had 2 strings on them. And it said, these 2 strings represent our relationship between the US and Mexico, our self on either side of the border, and or our mental state while crossing. Please make a knot. And then we would flip it, and then it would say, what are your thoughts when you cross this border? And so I was like, we'll see what happens. And so we started doing it, and then we realized what people were writing, and people's their personalities would change when they're like, no, I don't know how to do art. No, and I would just tell them I'm just asking you to tie a knot. And they're like, no, I don't know how to do that. And I'd be like, you were wearing tennis shoes, you tied your shoes in the morning, you know how to do it. And then people would be like, no, I don't have time. And then we'd be like, yeah, you still have 3 more hours to wait in line. You have 3 hours, And so it was really interesting to be in this space where people don't expect to be approached for some type of exchange, for some type of conversation, but also for people to be like, oh, I can do this, I can make this. And later, when we got to different point, we knew that the quipu was going to go to be exhibited at the Renwick, which is across from the White House. And then my mom would tell people, this is going to the President of the United States. You have to participate. So we had some trickery to get people to participate. But so here's some of the writing. What are your thoughts when you cross this border? Sad leaving loved ones divided by a wall. Every time I leave, one part of my heart stays here. What are your thoughts when you cross this border? Un lugar muy... no puedo leer. Un lugar muy contrastante, un lugar de espera, un lugar donde la gente se pone histérica, un lugar triste, un no lugar. Do you want to translate it or me?
But it's a place place of contrast, a place of waiting, a place where people become hysteric. It is a sad place. It is an unhome or a not home.
A non-place, yeah. What are your thoughts when you cross this border? It feels like a lot of racism towards Mexicans. I think we have contributed in the growth of the U.S. Many of us being seen as smugglers, vandals, this being written by a college student who needs to use 2 hours of his day to get to school every day. This one is a later one. This is from Matamoros in Brownsville. ¿Qué piensas cuando cruzas esta frontera? Veo el 90% de la gente cruzando para vender la plasma, sangre. I see 90% of people who cross to sell their plasma, blood. What are your thoughts when you cross this border? I haven't crossed the border in 11 years. I was afraid of Mexico. Today I took the risk to show my children a bit about their ancestors. I am nervous. And so after the first round that we did of the border equipo, we had thousands of people participate, and just reading the responses and seeing people's nods that were an emotional reflection of their lives on the border. I was like, oh my God, no, we have to do this for the whole border. And so then I was like, okay, how are we gonna do this? And so then through grant writing and through having amazing collaborators and an amazing team, we were able actually to travel the entirety of the US-Mexico border crisscrossing. It took us 3 years to complete all of the ports of entry, but we talked to people crossing on foot, vendors, anybody that congregated at the border. And I think Natalie's gonna talk a little bit more about some of the stuff. But after the first trip where we went on the road to try to do half of the border, when we were reading the responses, we were like, oh my God, this is crazy. There's like one collective emotion that's being, that's coming up through all these responses. And so in San Diego and Tijuana, it was anger. Nogales and Nogales, it was fear. Douglas and Agua Prieta was gratitude. And then El Paso and Ciudad Juarez was violence. And so I think we expected a lot of the other stuff, but the gratitude, we were like, this is crazy. We have to keep going. So we really wanted to understand a little bit more about how that happened and how do we learn to live together a little bit better. And so here's a map of all of the places that we went and all the different years. And it's not on view anymore, but the border quipu belongs to LACMA. So it was on view for a lot of this year, but this is what the piece looks like, and it has 18 different columns.
Hey everyone, I'm Natalie. So I joined AMBOS in 2017 after the first phase of the project. Tanya was assembling a team to travel the border, and I had just left my job and I wanted to move to LA, and I knew Tanya, so then I jumped on it. So yeah. Sorry. So aside from the border quipu, which was kind of the impetus for us to travel the border, we also wanted to document the border and also meet different artists alongside of it. So in our first trip, this is an intervention we did called 96 Deaths that we did in Sasabe, which is a very rural area in Arizona. And we met this artist, Glenn Wyand, who had been living at the border. He actually now lives in the opposite border in Vermont, but he was living at the border for a long time, and he would do these sound pieces where he would come and play the border fence. So he said, I'll take you to a place in the border where one of the poles is not filled with the slurry, so it rings like a bell. So it was a crazy day also. We had woken up at like 4 a.m. and we met him and we're like, okay, let's go. And it was really hot. And so we went and we honored the 96 people who had at that point been recorded to have perished in that border, and then said all their names as well. And a lot of them were not identified. So that was kind of like it was like the third day of our trip, and we did this. So a lot of the interventions that happened were very organic. Here's another intervention. I'll let you watch the video.
Would you attention to each other? Okay. Yeah. Ok, yo lo voy a hacer para que se enrede, para que agarre el mío con más tensión en las esquinas, so that our tension gets recorded. Ajá. Entonces, jálalo.
So this was an intervention that Tanya Aguiñiga, Tanya, and Jackie Amezquita, who's actually in the Maiden Lake show as well, did. Yeah, shout out to Jackie. They did in Agua Prieta, Sonora, in Douglas, Arizona. And if you see closely right behind Tanya, that truck that's right there is actually a Border Patrol agent. So you're actually not allowed to pass things through the border. So they're both on each side of the border. But that morning we had met an artist, Janae Sanchez, who actually has lived in that city her whole life, and she personally knew the Border Patrol agent who was on duty that day. She went with him like to high school or something, and then she also does a lot of programming, arts programming at the border. And through the Border Arts Corridor, that they have a lot of programs that they do there. So we were able to do this intervention, so it was very spontaneous and something that happened. And that specific crossing was where Jackie had crossed as a teenager. So it was really like powerful and like really important for her to honor that space in a different way. That was another intervention that happened. So throughout our travels, we met a lot of different artists. We visited a lot of different spaces. So here are some different artists and spaces we visited. So Studio Mariposa is a space in Naco, Sonora, which is run by an artist who is from Bisbee, Arizona, which is not right across the border, but very close. It's like an artist city town. And she goes and does these, they have this really small space where they do all of these art classes for kids. And it's so many people were there. It was really beautiful. And then we also we did interviews with different artists like Oscar Gardea, Duarte, who's on the right. And he talked about in Juarez about how a lot of his work was really political and a lot about the violence that was happening in Ciudad Juarez. So that's why he chose not to showcase his identity in the photo. And then in Juarez, there's also at the top, you see like we did a lot of, we did some social media interventions with some artists that lived at the border, and that's Nómada Estudio Urbano, who do a lot of like architecture interventions. We did get to meet them on our second trip, but they do also in Juarez, but a very different way of approaching art through like a positive lens. And then in the bottom, you see the artist who runs Casa de Oficios La Joyita in Mexicali, which they do a lot of art classes. So they had painted all these murals at the border. So when we were in Mexicali, they were taking down the old border fence to put the 30-foot fence. And that's him literally rescuing the murals from the people destroying them. So it's he was like, you're not gonna take these, we're gonna use them. Just amazing. So here's our other photos of the trips. There's also a photo on the right of Ángel Cabrales, is an artist in El Paso, who actually invited us to his parents' restaurant and invited all of these artists to come and meet us. It was really sweet to do a dinner with us. And he also invited a bunch of artists to make these like resin pan dulces, and decorate them. And we pass a lot of them to people crossing the border. And then the rest that that we didn't pass out, he actually auctioned them off and gave the money to one of the shelters in Juarez. And here's actually a photo with Janae Sanchez, who I mentioned before. We also did an intervention with her at the border. And you can see videos and more details on our website if you want to learn more. I just wanted to show some photos of like what the border looks like in different places. This is in Tecate when we're doing the border quipu. This is in Tijuana where they have Friendship Park, in quotes, which now they're trying to get rid of, where people actually would get to sometimes meet their loved ones across the border over the fence. This is a photo of Tanya overlooking the fence and where they had built all these border wall prototypes during the Trump administration. And we did actually intervention in front of that. And there's a photo of the team in 2018. We found these tires that are used by Border Patrol to mark, to clear out the land so they can see footsteps where people are crossing. So we left a message for them. And here's a border crossing in the only border crossing that's done by ferry in Los Ebanos in Texas. So it's like a hand-pulled ferry. And on the right, there's a picture of the border fence that cuts through the mountains in Tijuana, through the hills. This photo, I'm gonna tell you a story. And the one time I told the story to people and they told me, I think that was a fever dream, but it was not a fever dream. It really happened. So we wanted to go to every single port of entry. So we went to a port of entry that's in New Mexico. It's like really remote. And mostly people use it, the people that are riding their bikes through the transcontinental divide. So it's really remote and nobody's there. They close early. So we were like, okay, we're gonna make it. We're gonna try to make it to this border crossing. And then there was no gas stations around. So by the time we made it, we had no gas. And we were there and the guy was like, what are you doing here? And we're like, we're trying to get to a lake. And he's like, there's no lake on the other side. Where are you? Like, what are you trying to get to? And we're like, we were trying to cross all the border crossings and all this stuff. And then I was like, well, we were out of gas. Like, do we know where is a gas station? And he was like, okay, well, I have a little bit of gas and I have some friends who live on the other side who have a ranch. And I think they can give you the other part of the gas. So the Border Patrol agent gave us some of his gas, and then people on the other side gave us some gas. And we were able to make it home, to make it to our hotel. And this man lives at the border crossing. His house is right there, and he has 11 dogs that he rescued that crossed the border. That I know it sounds fake, it's real. So it was really magical collaboration across both sides. Here's the intervention we did in front of the border wall prototypes, recording, it's called America's Wall, recording with the rust of the wall, what it looks like at that time. And here's the intervention that Tanya did, where she actually hugged the wall until the rust from the fence transferred onto the shirt that she was wearing. It was very cold, and she was wet. Took for a really long time. And then here's some other interventions we did as a team when we were in this called Amistad Bridge, which means friendship bridge, which I don't know what friendship there is in this bridge. But yeah, so we were kind of recording our bodies and the tensions in our bodies. Here's some other photos of what the border looks like, so you can kind of see the different landscapes. And you can see in Nogales how the border is right up against people's houses. And actually Nogales was maybe the one place we saw that we kind of kept forgetting what side of the border we were on. And then here's some others. This memorial for this boy was in Nogales. He was actually shot by a Border Patrol agent through the fence for throwing rocks. Yeah. So they have a memorial for him there. And then on the right, in Puerto Palomas, Chihuahua, we see a playground that's right up against the border fence. And here are some photos of our team. This is our trusty van that we rode through the borderlands. It broke a couple times, but and then here's a mural that is in Presidio, by El Mac in Presidio, Texas. Just wanted to remind you that the border is also beautiful. So that was an artist, Ramon Neanda, who we met, and then he took us to this place where there was the old border crossing where the river used to be, and then he brought his musician friends, and it was really beautiful to be there. But then they didn't let us leave. They were. We were trying to leave, and we're like, we're really tired. And they're like, no, but we're going to play one more song. So that's also something that happened. And then here is a part of the the border wall as well, where you can see how there's no fence and the river is that what divides the landscape. Some more photos of the different things we saw. This is one of the murals that were the other photo you saw of the artist trying to take the murals away. That was one of the murals that was there. And then this is the photo that Tanya showed before. That is the border wall that was being constructed at that time, which is now standing in Mexicali. And then there's some very strange places where there's public and private land meet. So there's parts where there's border that is just open like that. The border also meets the national park in Texas. So you can see here there's people who cross through the river and come and leave things to sell at the border crossing. And there's all signs through the border that says "Don't buy things, it's dangerous," which is, I don't know how that's dangerous, but and then there's one place where the border is actually there's a golf course right up the border. So we were there, and then we stole a golf cart, but we gave it back. We didn't steal it; we just borrowed it for a little bit. And then here's a photo of Diana and Jackie at the end of the night tying all the knots in our hotel room for the border quipu. And this is in Matamoros. There was a really cool space they took us to, which was an abandoned building that they turned into a cultural center. And then here's a photo of the teams that we were in our AMBOS on the Road team, as we called it. And here we are all in 2018, documentarians, Border Quipu crew. I was doing like social media, and we were all just working together. And then on the right, we are all together in the show that solo show that Tanya had at the Mad Museum that had a lot of AMBOS work in it. And then I will kind of transition off from this part is in 2018 when we were traveling the border, the family separations were at its peak. So we actually attended a few protests that were happening outside detention centers. So at that time, we actually were really thinking about how we could continue to engage with the communities and support them. So we, when we came back, we started doing a lot of humanitarian aid because there was a lot of caravans that were coming. So this is, we made like thousands of aid packs and collected a bunch of diapers and shoes and clothes and all kinds of stuff that we took down. So that's me in the bottom. It's like Tanya's car filled to the brim with the donations that then we sorted. And then we also did a fundraiser in collaboration with DubLab for an organization that was helping people who had just left detention centers in San Diego. And then on the right, in 2018, we did the Arts Datathon to try to compile all the postcards that were collected at the border quipu. We still actually haven't finished, so one day we will. But we did a lot during the datathon, which was awesome. And then we could kind of start to see some themes that came through in the other cities that we did it. And then I will pass it to Tanya.
You know, how do we exist in this space? How do we stay safe? How do we contend with the realities of life at the border and everybody affected by it? A really big thing was for the border quipu when I first thought about it, and even the first phase of AMBOS, I was like, oh, it's about transnational folks. It's about my community. And then like the first day I was like, oh shit, I can't believe I was so entitled to like plan this whole thing around people, only around people that can cross. And so then really quickly I was like, oh shit, like not everybody can cross, of course, and not a lot of people want to cross. And some people can't come back. Like we have such a huge community of people that have been deported. And so I think with every phase, we kind of expanded who the audience was and what we wanted to learn and kind of how deep we wanted to go into exploring and complicating what the border is and who lives there and who, you know, it's not just us that are born there or like grow up there. There's constant flux and constant people coming. Every single city changes so much depending on, you know, what's happening politically like that day or that morning. on both sides. The Border Patrol has different jurisdictions that cross state lines. There's all kinds of crazy stuff, no? And so then after learning more and more of the stuff, we kind of got to a point where we were like, okay, I think we need to just start sharing more information and trying to use some of these opportunities like exhibitions to demystify for people how they can get involved. Because a lot of stuff just felt so big that, you know, people were like, oh, that's awesome that you're doing that, but like, how can I get involved in, like, I don't want the US to take away people's kids, you know, and so we're like, this is all really big stuff and we need to share the load. We need to, you know, like help each other access this stuff. And so we ended up, like I said, using different exhibition opportunities and opportunities that came my way to just share information with folks. So this is a show that I did with Chanupa Hanska Luger in Mesa, Arizona. And so then a lot of it was just having people take away postcards that told them different information that they might need. And so some of it was like, if all you care about is art history, cool, here's a list of border art history in theory. If you want to, you know, sponsor a migrant in your home, here's information. Southwest border immigration statistics, how to report a missing migrant, know your rights. So it was different levels of what people may need, and also showing people why they needed to care. And so this was a map that, like the line with all the red dots, was a map that was also older, that was just the reported deaths that had been like reported in the US and Mexico. And the red region is where this exhibition was. And so I really wanted people to understand that they are in the middle of this very perilous area that needs, you know, humanitarian attention. And so what I did was, because of this mutual aid that we had already started doing with the caravans arriving in Tijuana, we realized that different people need different things. And so then we were like, all right, like let's make posters for people to start doing their own fund drives. They can like drop stuff off at the museum. They can put them in these red receptacles. Like, here's everything, you know, if you just care about babies, like, cool, here's your poster for babies. Like, if you, you know, so it was just trying to like make it super accessible for whatever your interests were, no? But nobody made anything. So the whole run of the exhibition, the only people that made stuff were the museum staff, because I shamed them into it. But it's still, I mean, now we have this stuff already made and ready to go.
Yeah, but then we also
And then you did it in Long
collections
Beach.
at Long Beach City College, and we got some packs. Yeah.
It was a pretty big box. And that one we sent to New York for to greet all the people that were arriving on buses. So we have, because of all this different work and, you know, like being like, yeah, we can just go and do whatever we want, like on the Mexican side, and nobody really asks us anything. We've been able to do a lot of amazing projects that kind of address different situations on the border. This is one that we did called Linea Pack, and it was a border crossing kit to stay safe while crossing in your car. Because like Carla said, sometimes you have to go pee and you can't get out. Sometimes you're dehydrated and you can't get out. So it had emergency water, emergency toilet, food, rehydration stuff, but then also a petition to try to get people to ask the US government to have a lane for the elderly and disabled folks to be able to cross faster. And so for this project, I was intending and hoping to sue the US government for violating ADA. But then I ended up not being able to, because the US government at this site had not done anything to hurt me, and I was not disabled or hurt in any way. But I still tried. And so in all of these weird ass, like me trying different things, I ended up, Natalie and I became part of this humanitarian strategic committee that was trying to help figure out how to help the caravans of migrants arriving in Tijuana. And we started doing this work when the first 40,000 person caravan arrived. So I became friends with the woman that runs this place called Centro 32, Center 32. And it used to be part of Families Belong Together. But then Families Belong Together was a subsidy or a branch of the domestic workers union, and so then they couldn't keep doing this migrant rights work because they were like, this is not what we do. And so then somehow we ended up becoming one of their main sponsors for a lot of the projects that they do in shelters. And so before the pandemic, I was doing this project where I was like, okay, let's take clay to a bunch of different shelters. And we were doing these beads for the show in Arizona with Chanupa. And as soon as I took the clay and I loved it so much. One of the shelters was for families. And so I put the clay down, and then one man came and grabbed the clay and he started kneading it like dough. And I was like, oh, wow, you know how to do this? And he's like, yeah, I was a baker in my town. And so I was like, awesome. And then this little girl came up and she was like, can I touch it? And I was like, yes. And then she was like, will it hurt me? And so I was like, no, baby, it's just mud. And so then she just put it all over her face. And so I was like, oh my God, clay is so amazing. I'm not a clay artist. I work mostly in fiber. But I was like, oh my God, clay has such an amazing, very open, therapeutic property to it. And so then, so I had just, let me see if there's a photo. This is a different smuggling trip, but I had just liberated 700 pounds of clay into Mexico. Before the pandemic happened. And so then when the pandemic happened, I was like, oh my God, I need to think of ways to help folks because the borders closed, people are stuck in the shelters. And one of the shelters that I had visited is Jardín de Mariposas, which is an LGBTQ shelter, but it also has a 12-step program. So people are also detoxing and going through, recovery. And so I was like, oh my God. And at that time, when I first went there, they had a security guard to keep people from coming in to hurt folks that were at the shelter. And so I was like, oh my God, they're stuck in there dealing with so many different levels of trauma. And so I was like, oh, I'm so happy that that there's all this clay down there. But then I was like, okay, what am I going to do with this clay? And so then I was like, I'm not a clay artist. So then I asked my friend Gerardo, I was like, Gerardo, can you teach clay on Zoom for folks in the shelter? And then he was like, yeah. And then I was like, Carlita, you want to do stuff too? And she was like, yeah. So she was teaching drawing classes for little kids in a different shelter. But then they didn't have a desk to put the computer. She had to order a computer. And this is when the border was closed, so we couldn't cross. And so then Carla was ordering and then she was like, oh, for the drawing, they don't even have paper or pencils. So she had to order all the stuff. And so it was really crazy, but we were really glad that we had all the stuff already in Mexico and ready to go, and people used to Zoom. But then after we ran out of all the clay, I was like, oh, people can just get clay in Tijuana, right? And then we found out that there was no clay in Tijuana. And that there was it's not like here you go to Blick, or whatever, Laguna, and buy stuff. Over there was no art store to go. The only clay was people that were crossing the border to the U.S. to buy it in the U.S. and then take it back. So then we were like, oh my God, we didn't even think about this. And then I was like, oh, after everybody made everything, I was like, how are we going to fire it? So then I was like, oh my God. So then luckily the first ceramic studio that was open to the public had opened May of 2020. And so she was trying to start her business but had no way of making money because the pandemic happened and everything was shut down. So then I was like, well, can I just give you a bunch of money to fire everything that gets made at the shelters? And so then I was able to help her. So then it's been this really crazy kind of, everybody's adapting and trying to figure out how to make it work and how to do it so that we can make sure that we're there to help folks. And one really amazing part of this all too is that our partner, Centro 32, was able to also provide help, but also provide a therapist. So she's a social worker that's at every class, because we really wanted the classes to be rooted in like healing and being trauma informed. So this is just a picture that I like, and then Juan's gonna talk. But so a lot of the stuff, we have to be really resourceful with like getting stuff back and forth. All of our clay is upcycled clay that we get from different studios here in LA. We're constantly trying to figure out how to get like Santa Barbara, LA, San Diego, and Tijuana folks, the craft community, the art community, to care and to get involved. So I'm constantly trying to figure out different like little webs to spin and to weave people together. But this is me crossing, liberating a slab roller across the border. And so because a slab roller is expensive, and I was like, oh no, they're gonna take all this money from me when we cross. So then I was like, I'm just gonna fill the whole car with balloons, and then they won't wanna inspect my car because then the balloons will get out. So then this was me, taking the slab roller to Tijuana. Okay, so now, Juan.
Hola, muy buenas noches. Yo voy a hablar un poco más del proceso del programa de AMBOS Ceramics que hacemos en Tijuana, y también sobre el equipo que nos ayuda y los colaboradores que tenemos en Tijuana.
So, hi, good evening, everybody. I am going to be talking about the process today, the AMBOS Ceramics team, the work that we do in TJ, and also the team that helps us and the people who collaborate on the TJ side.
El programa de cerámica de AMBOS, como bien lo mencionó Tanya, comenzó en el 2020, y debido a las políticas migratorias que había en ese momento y la cuestión de salud debido a la pandemia, muchos de las personas que estaban migrando se quedaron en Tijuana como una población flotante, y cada vez eran más, ¿no? Y al no poder cruzar se estaba generando también un momento de tensión, que fue lo que AMBOS pensó que podía ser bueno para crear este programa, ¿no?
So the ceramics program, like Tanya mentioned, started in 2020. And because the immigration policy at the time and the health crisis due to the pandemic, a lot of the migrants were stuck in TJ as kind of like a floating population. And it just kept growing and not being able to cross. There was just a tension. And AMBOS thought that it would be a good thing to start this project.
En el año 2020, bajo el comando de Gerardo Monterrubio y después por la artista Patricia Josen, se estuvieron dando clases online, y después en 2021 fue cuando Tanya y Carla me invitaron a ser parte de estas actividades de manera presencial. Yo tengo 10 años dando clases de cerámica en diferentes espacios en México, pero yo pensé que ya lo sabía todo de cómo dar una clase, y este espacio, llegar al albergue, fue una práctica totalmente distinta para mí.
And it was in 2020 under Gerardo Monterrubio and the artist Patricia Josen, their teachings. They were actually doing some online courses, and it was in 2021 through Carla and Tanya, who invited me to be a part of these in person. And I have been teaching ceramics for 10 years at several spaces in Mexico, and I thought that I knew everything about teaching. So arriving at the shelter was actually a very illuminating experience for me.
Bueno, quiero mencionar en este slide de izquierda para derecha La chica que se encuentra ahí es Anabela Alarcón. Ella es la directora de Lustre Estudio, que es el espacio donde hacemos colaboración y quemamos las piezas que hacemos en el programa. Y la siguiente chica es Estefanía Coronado. Ella es la psicóloga de Centro 32 que nos acompaña durante todas las clases y nos da apoyo psicológico en las diferentes situaciones con los estudiantes, ¿no? En el día a día.
And I want to mention, it was the slide from, left to right. The person there, the woman, is Anabela Alarcón, the director of Lustre Studio.
Yes.
And that is a place where we collaborate and use the kiln. Then Estefania Colorado, she is actually the therapist who joins us for every class and offers psychological support for all the students taking the classes in this space.
Entonces lo que sucedió es que yo tenía un programa ya listo para dar clases que normalmente uso en otros espacios, pero la dinámica de un albergue es que gente llega y tú empiezas a dar una clase y después esas personas a la siguiente semana que vuelves ya no están y llegan otros 20 nuevos. Entonces tuve que reestructurar todas las actividades a pequeños ejercicios que sirvieran como a manera de un primer acercamiento al arte, pero también como una terapia donde realmente nos sentamos alrededor pues a conversar y a compartir historias.
So what happened is that I had the program, it was ready, I was ready to teach, it was the program that I used elsewhere, but it turns out that the dynamic at the shelter is very different. So what happens is that people arrive and then you start to teach something, and then the next time that you show up, folks are no longer there. And then other 20 people show up, and then it just keeps happening. So I had to restructure everything to actual smaller exercises, but they had to be this kind of like a first approach to art that people experience there. And they also had to be a form of therapy. And what we did is we just sat all together and we shared and we just had conversations.
Estas imágenes son parte del primer proyecto donde los estudiantes del programa fueron involucrados para crear una pieza junto con ambos. La pieza se llama Memoria y estas son unos objetos de cerámica que los estudiantes construyeron y son unos copaleros que se fueron atando en toda la frontera entre México y Estados Unidos, desde Tijuana hasta Matamoros, y donde estos objetos que estaban hechos por personas migrantes, a su vez llegaban a este espacio donde otros migrantes convivían con ellas, ¿no? Y podían como desde hacer alguna oración o dejar una plegaria, una cuestión simbólica del pasar por este espacio.
And these images are part of the first project that we did with the students. And they were involved in obviously doing this with AMBOS. This piece is called Memoria, Memory. And these are the clay objects that the students made. And these are copaleros. And they were tied between the border from Tijuana to Matamoros. And, you know, these are the objects made by immigrants. So people just showed up to the space and they spent a lot of time with them. And they could either just, you know, have an interaction that was symbolic or to use it as a place of worship or to pray.
Y bueno, la dinámica de las clases en Tijuana con estos albergues, primero fue en Jardín de las Mariposas y en 2022 comenzamos a hacer clases con Casa Arcoíris. Mayormente hacemos piezas que involucran que ellos hagan algún ejercicio de expresión. Muchas veces hacemos ejercicios de representación anatómica y me parece muy interesante porque más allá de la representación física, es como cómo se conciben ellas mismas, ¿no? Hay algunas piezas por aquí, bueno, estas mariposas que hicieron en jardín, pero hay algunas donde las propias estudiantes, sobre todo la comunidad de las chicas trans, empiezan a concebir cómo es que ellas se ven y eso lo reflejan en las piezas, ¿no? En los modelados.
So that's the dynamic of the classes in Tijuana with the shelters in Jardín de las Mariposas, and then in 2020 with Casa Arcoiris. We made pieces that involved them, and it was an exercise to express something. And also we did some anatomical representation exercises. And it was very interesting because beyond the physical representation, it was more about how they conceived themselves as people. And there was a picture there. There were butterflies from Jardín. And there, some of the students there, especially the trans girls, they really started to conceive how they saw themselves, right? And that was actually reflected. You could see it in all of the pieces that they made.
También, bajo las actividades que hacemos en las clases, compartimos alguna información como de videos para que ellas también vean cómo otras personas trabajan con la arcilla, y también hacemos visitas a museos. A veces algunas de nuestras estudiantes nunca habían visitado un espacio de arte y siendo esta la primera vez, pues es muy emocionante para nosotros, ¿no? Como que pensaban que esto era muy ajeno a ellas, que ellas no podían tener acceso a un espacio de arte y también hacer arte, ¿no? Entonces, ellas siempre o sea, lo que yo aprendí es que siempre les han negado las cosas, como decir, tú no puedes hacer, tú no puedes involucrarte de esta manera, y ellas siempre están buscando como la aprobación en clase, como maestro, esto está bien hecho. Y bueno, hacer este tipo de actividades reafirma el cómo ellas se pueden concebir ante el mundo, ¿no?
And we also, during the activities that we do there, we share information like videos. They can see how people work with clay, and we also do some museum visits. And actually, some of our students had never been to an art space before, and that being the first time for them was something that was very exciting for us. And they actually thought that this was something very foreign to them, right? Not having access to that, to going to those spaces and also making the art. So what I learned is that for the most part, they have been denied everything, right? Like, oh, you can't do this or you can't get involved with that. So they were constantly seeking approval from me as a teacher. So I really saw that these activities were actually an affirmation to them as people.
Bueno, y al ser parte de nuestros estudiantes junto con el estudio Lustre, también hemos incluido a las chicas del albergue como en exhibiciones que hacemos como parte del estudio. También nuestra psicóloga ha sido modelo y estas son unas piezas que fueron hechas con ella, ¿no? Con un ejercicio de figura humana en vivo.
So being part of this with Studio Lustre, we actually included the girls from the shelter at the exhibitions that we did in the studio. And this photo, actually, that is our psychologist modeling. And these are some pieces using her as a live model.
Bueno, nuestros estudiantes son población de la comunidad LGBT. Los albergues con los que trabajamos es Jardín de las Mariposas y Casa Arcoiris. Y los países o los estudiantes que hemos tenido, algunos son de Honduras, Guatemala, Salvador, Jamaica, Haití, algunas de Nicaragua, casi siempre de Centroamérica, la mayoría, pero también hemos tenido estudiantes de Rusia, Croacia, Caribe también, sí.
So our students are folks from the LGBT community, and the shelters that we work with are Jardín de las Mariposas and Casa Arcoiris. And the students, I mean, range from people from Honduras, Guatemala, Salvador, Jamaica, Haiti, Nicaragua, for the most part, Central America, but also folks from Russia, Croatia, and the Caribbean.
Están buscando asilo político para cruzar a Estados Unidos. La mayoría quieren venir a hacer una vida diferente acá, o muchas están pasando por un proceso de inclusive persecución solo por ser quienes son y por lo que quieren ser, ¿no?
These are people seeking political asylum to cross to the USA, and they just want to make a living over here. Some are also actually being chased out or going through some persecution from their original countries.
Bueno, algunas de los talleres que tenemos, tratamos de que los estudiantes también vayan al Lustre Estudio y que vean cómo es el proceso de un taller en el día a día, que vean las instalaciones, que trabajen directamente ahí. Son regularmente sesiones que nuestros estudiantes se divierten mucho y les gusta mucho visitar el estudio.
And these are some of the workshops that we have. We try to bring the students actually in person to Lustre Studio to see the installations and just to work there. And these are sessions that are actually very, very fun to be in.
Estas piezas que están a continuación son parte de un proyecto llamado AMBOS for You, y fue algo que hicimos para la Feria Freeze de este año. Algunos artistas de Los Ángeles, San Diego y Tijuana donaron piezas, esculturas que ellos hicieron sin pintar, y los estudiantes de Tijuana, de los albergues, hicieron el proceso de pintura. O sea, fue una colaboración entre los artistas y nuestros estudiantes, y eso se presentó en Freeze y se vendió para sacar fondos para seguir haciendo las clases. Right.
And these are actually works that are part of a project called AMBOS for You. And we actually did those for the Freeze Fair this year. Some artists from San Diego, Los Angeles, and Tijuana donated some sculptures that they created, and then the students from the shelters painted them. So it was a collaboration between the artists and our students that they were sold to fundraise to keep our classes going.
I'm gonna interrupt, Juan. We still have a lot of those pieces available, so if you want to contribute, we still have some for sale. Some are actually in the Hammer bookstore.
Y bueno, algunos de los artistas que participaron son Gerardo Monterrubio, Ben Medansky, Julia Hafkando, bueno, son un montón. Y parte de las actividades que hicimos en el estudio de Lustre fue una colaboración con Casa Arcoiris por el mes del Pride, y se hicieron estas vajillas donde están intervenidas con textos de las chicas de Casa Arcoiris. Algo que me gusta mucho de las estudiantes es que, a pesar de todo lo que están pasando, siempre tienen una actitud súper divertida y son muy alegres, y bueno, es muy chistoso siempre como todo lo que están diciendo, como este slang con el que se comunican, y todo eso quedó impreso en estas vajillas que están en venta aquí en la tienda del Hammer.
And well, some of the artists are Gerardo Monterrubio and Julia, and well, there was a lot of people involved. And part of the activities that we did in Lustre Studio was a collaboration with Casa Arcoiris for Pride Month. And we actually made this china with a text from the girls from Casa Arcoiris. And what I really love about the students is that regardless of everything that is happening to them, they are still remaining very positive and very joyful. And some of the words, some of the slang that they use is actually printed here on the pieces.
Y bueno, que las piezas están a la venta acá. Y parte del dinero que de la venta se va nuevamente a Casa Arcoiris. Y bueno, quería mostrarles que el dinero que se fue para esa venta se gastó en hacer un altar de muertos. Las chicas festejaron ese día, compraron piñatas y bueno, celebraron un poco de la cultura mexicana también.
And well, the pieces, you can buy them here. And part of the funds, again, those are going to Casa Arcoiris. And I just also wanted to share that the money was spent in also making an altar for Day of the Dead, Dia de Muertos. So the girls bought piñatas, and we just celebrated our Mexican cultural heritage.
Okay, I'll try to go fast. Yeah. So I just wanted to give you some context about Con nuestras manos construimos deidades. With our hands we build deities, which is the piece we have here at Made in LA. And we wanted to share that this piece was not made just by us, but by 237 people who participated in our workshops across borders in Tijuana, San Diego, and LA. So we created different elements. Part of it inspired by the clay, the AMBOS ceramics program, creating all of these clay hands that showcase all the people who participated that you can actually touch. You can touch the piece. It also has different elements like a sound piece where people's stories about objects that they're connected to in their culture. So this is a photo of the first workshop we did in Tijuana with people from different shelters, and it actually, we were expecting like 10 people to show up and 75 people showed up. So it was amazing. And we had a lot of people participate and a lot of kids. We did it in collaboration with Centro 32, which was amazing. So here are just some photos of different workshops where we did the clay hands was one of the pieces. So one beautiful thing is that maybe some of the clay hands were made on one side of the border and then they were glazed on the other side, similar to the AMBOS for You project. Here's a workshop we did at Tanya's studio. Another part of the project was weaving all of the arms for the hands. And also creating these amulets for protection that were printed and then embroidered and then sewn by me at the end that were inspired by scapularios, which are religious objects that people wear with saints, but we kind of changed the meaning and used a lot of symbols of protection and good luck. So again, you can see maybe some people printed it, another person finished it, and then another person finished on top of that, embroidering it. And then here is Sergio Soberanes, who is recording this, who did the sound piece, who also happens to be my husband. But he's not here. He's with our kid at home. So there's different workshops we did and how people were able to collaborate across borders even without even knowing the other person. So yeah, just to show you a little behind the scenes of all the workshops. And then another workshop they did at the shelters. The Hammer made a beautiful video of the process, so you can see some of that. And then here's the installation shot, and then the whole amazing installation prep crew helping us put plants inside because we didn't have enough. So we also wanted to add plants inside, healing plants, so you can also smell the piece. So we wanted to show you that too. And then, yeah, we wanted to show you can touch the piece and you can listen to it. So we hope that if you haven't checked it out, you can go check it out and see everything up close and touch the hand of a person that maybe is across waiting for asylum. And I'll pass it to Carla.
Maybe you can go through the slides because I'm going to talk really fast. But there's also a part of, as you saw, in a lot of the AMBOS projects, a lot of the interventions, there's a lot of knowledge sharing, and we decided that we also needed to include research in this because this piece wasn't enough with all of the touching and the sound piece. So we actually created a zine, which you can kind of see a little mock-up of what was in the vitrine. And if you go to the next slide, some of the research stemmed from my thesis, which was about U.S.-Mexico border and historical and ideological construction of the borderlands. And I was thinking about it from prehistory to like present, and how does cultural policy become involved, and basically kind of looking at this timeline that I had created. And then we worked with two researchers, which is Beatriz Cortés, the artist and scholar Beatriz Cortés, and also Douglas Carranza. And they basically told me timelines are the white man's like problem. We should not be thinking about timelines, and that like time is nonlinear. So this should be, if we're going to make this research, it should be rhizomatic. That means that it's just like a big web of interconnections. So we kind of did away with this timeline, and we still have a little bit of a timeline, but it's a little bit less again, it's thinking about animals and plants and minerals, and thinking about forced migrations and natural migrations. So if you scan the QR code, you can look at the book on your phone. There's also zines that are for you to take that the Hammer generously printed, and you can make your own little zine, which really was not one zine, it turned into a book. But basically you can get copies on your way out, and basically you can keep your own little copy. And we would like to invite you, if you take one, fold it, make it your own, stitch it. Really we want to, as you can see, a lot of our projects are very collaborative. So you are now AMBOS collaborators. So send us pictures of your zine. But again, plants, animals, different migrations, and I hope you guys enjoy it. It was a lot of work to try to figure out how do we get these ideas, and it is centered on mostly Mesoamerican cultures and perspectives, but of course we know these are not the only cultures in the Americas. There's lots of other peoples and histories, but that was one of the nodes because the researchers that we were working with kind of centered on that. And then future.
Should we just stop or no? We can just stop. Yeah. Maybe we just stop because I know that we've been going over. We're talking too much, no? Or we keep going? We're almost done. Okay. So we're trying to wrap it up. So we have a show that's up right now other than here at the Long Beach Museum of Art called Ordinary. We're in one called Ordinary People. And it is a show of a lot of social justice-based artist projects. And we asked Gina Klein, who was our AMBOS photographer and documentarian, to curate a show of images and ephemera of our trips. So we hope you please see it. So we try to do a bunch of different projects that collaborate with different artists. And so this is a project that we did for Freeze last year. If we go ahead. So we also have been invited to be part of Freeze again in 2024. We still have to figure out what we're going to do for that. But we also have some shirts. I don't know if there's still any available at the store that we did in collaboration with it was with 15 shelters. We can go next. And so we're hoping in the future to be able to do a ceramics program also at my studio for our students that have crossed into the U.S. that actually are here in LA, so that we can continue their ceramic education and access. We were given a 3D ceramic printer a couple years ago now, and we're still trying to figure out how to make 3D printing work with therapy and with the hand. So if any of you are interested in helping us figure out how do we incorporate those two things, that's something we're hoping to work on in the future. After doing the workshops, in San Diego, Tijuana, and LA. For the piece for Here for the Hammer, we realized how much people want to get together and how healing it is for people to be processing together while we make things together. So we think that we might be doing a lot more just gatherings and making of stuff in the future. And so I think it's like almost at the end. So this is something from Southwest Folklife Alliance that just got posted recently that I thought was really beautiful to try to kind of end with. So it says, reclaiming the border narrative amid the contradictions of this place, invoke a higher strategy. And it says, okay. Oh. No, I think I can see it. Keep the frame on what is humane against all odds, but don't go it alone. Align yourself with other artists, movement workers, journalists, and everyday people, and together train in building narrative power. Call on us, the artist disruptors, who dare say that immigration is natural, beautiful, and an irrevocable human right. Notice the tables we set for the tamalada en ambos lados, the sky blue hues we use to disappear the border wall. Read our poems, our plays, our manifestos. Implode the lie that we do not know how to fix this mess. We do. Look to the storyteller wizards who set up butterfly labs to incubate and multiply a new outrageous proposal. No border. Ya basta. Ask your trusted allies who has been successful in shifting the border story. Learn from them, test messages, create symbols, flood the channels with new material. Tell a more complicated love story. Dissect the contradictions of border policies. Only you and your network of narrators can buck the trends of the media machine. Pan out. Where else do border stories live? New York, Mexico City. Gather stories there. Pan in Tijuana, Nogales, Brownsville. Gather stories here. Invest in dissenting chronicles. Invest money if you have it. Y si no, pues, ni modo. Invest strategy. Actions, truth-telling spells. Gather tools and work it. Work it, work it. Until a broad body of work stands tall above the insidious wall.
Oh, this morning I shared this. My friend brought her daughter to see the show, and she sent me this photo that she drew at school. This weekend I went to the museum, and then that's the AMBOS piece, and she wrote, "Wow," and we thought it was so sweet. She's in like kindergarten, yeah. And follow us on Instagram so you can see all the stuff we're doing, and you can also it's actually a really cool archive of a lot of the stuff we've done, so we hope you can check it out.
And also, AMBOS is in the process of becoming a nonprofit, finally. So if you follow us, that's also a great opportunity to, see what we're working in the future. Because again, doing artist-run projects does not pay for itself. And again, we need support, we need community, and a lot of it is we give a lot, but we also, again, we need help kind of spreading this great work and the great work of these great artists. So thanks. Claudia, I know we're past time. Do we want to do a Q&A, or do you want to go outside? The what?
Go to Coffee, Tea, Cookies, and ask questions there.
Okay, perfect. Take your zine, get some coffee, let's hang out, let's chat. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you, guys.